The second type of attack on election is disruption. Now, again, this type of attack was defined by the OSET Institute. I'm using that as a guideline, but expanding upon their definition. When OSET talks about disruption, they're talking about the negative impact of voter turnout or other disruptions to the process. Anything that is a disruption could turn voters away from the polls. When we talk about disruption, I've expanded the OSET definitions to include domestic and in-house attacks. Now, it's key that for an in-house attack, which I'm defining as an attack on election integrity that can only be executed by lawmakers or election officials, some of these are the outcome of incompetence. In other instances, it is the outcome of a targeted strategy to decrease the opportunity for people to have access to the vote. The closing of polling locations is an example of disruption for the normal process of democratic participation. The improper distribution of voting machines so that certain precincts have fewer voting machines and therefore longer lines is another type of attack. A consequence across an entire state, for example, that uses the same type of voting machine. Certain counties may not have as much money or may not purchase as much, and that could be correlated to income level of the county, which could also be correlated to race and demographic information. So all of these things can only be carried out by decisions and policies of election officials or lawmakers. This also includes things such as quote unquote legal disenfranchisement. Felon disenfranchisement is a prime example where certain populations of people who are disproportionately people of color are disenfranchised, legally through the legal process. Gerrymandering and restricted photo ID rules are another avenue of quote unquote legal disenfranchisement, though the courts in North Carolina have been involved in changing those rules in this state, especially for 2020. Another example, though on a relatively small scale for legal disenfranchisement, for in-house disenfranchisement, would be the non-availability of voting machines in every polling place for people with disabilities. If someone arrives at a polling place and can't access the polling place via a ramp or an automatic door, then they are disenfranchised. Or if they enter a polling place and the electronic voting machine that they can use because they can't mark a hand mark paper ballot is another form of voter disenfranchisement. To be clear, very few voters are reported of using these voting systems in North Carolina. The more common type of attack for disruption is considered a malicious outsider attack. And these are attacks carried out by anybody who is not part of the official process. This could be a foreign nation state actor such as Russia, or a criminal actor seeking to install some sort of ransomware or other mechanism for disrupting an election for likely monetary gain. Examples of malicious attacks are ransomware, hacks on electronic poll books, which communicate during early voting and often on election day, which voters are able to vote in that precinct or early voting site. Hacking voter registration sites in general to create confusion around who is actually allowed to vote and where they are allowed to vote. Or in a severe case, an attack on the power grid. Turning off the power grid would have extensive impacts on the regular day-to-day actions of any American, but would be much more severe for democracy if that happened around election day. There are solutions to most of these attacks, and the Election Security Plan, which is a forthcoming document from the North Carolina State Board of Elections, is going to outline how the state is planning on responding to these threats. Carolina Public Press will extensively cover the security plan and report on how feasible the actions are. To the credit of the State Board of Elections is working with the National Guard and the Department of Homeland Security, as well as Department of Public Safety and a number of other partners to make sure that every single county has improved cybersecurity stances from 2016. It cannot be denied that every county in North Carolina, as well as the state itself, is more prepared than it was in 2016. What is a legitimate question is whether or not they are prepared enough for 2020.